Good day, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Happy to have you joining us. We have a really great topic, certainly applicable to the times that we're all in. The topic is innovating in uncertain times, keeping DevOps agile and secure. So I'm going to be hosting as well as also talking today. So I'll be speaking a little bit up front. Today's webinar is sponsored by Beyond Trust. We're happy to be working with the Beyond Trust folks. Again, my name is Mitch Ashley. I'm going to be hosting today. We have a couple of housekeeping items we want to make sure we take care of. First of all, we're recording the webinar, so we will be sending an email with links to the recording as well as slides after the webinar. So sit back, relax. You want to take a few notes, you can, but don't worry, you'll have the slides. Also, we're giving away 2 gift certificates, $50 gift cards at the end. So please stick around, take advantage of those. We'll be announcing who the winners are at the end. And of course, that my guest speaker, who I'll introduce in a moment, and I really appreciate questions. The more audience participation, the better. It keeps it interesting for all of us. So please pop your questions into the questions tab of the GoToWebinar software. So let's move on to our topic, innovating in uncertain times, keeping DevOps agile and secure. So let me start by introducing my co-host, my co-speaker, Jason Jones, who's Senior Product Manager, Beyond Trust. Jason will be following after I have a chance to do a little bit of talking up front, a few slides up front. And again, my name is Mitch Ashley. I'm actually CEO and Managing Analyst at a company called Accelerated Strategies Group. So let's move on to our topic here. We don't need the introductions there. We're actually going to start with a poll. And let me bring that up for everyone to take a look at and participate. So we appreciate everybody jumping in here. So that's going to take over our screen. The question is, are there any upcoming security related initiatives that you'd like to learn more about in 2020? So taking responses now, so please everybody jump in. And we'll show the results in just a moment. I feel like we should have that kind of clock sound, the game show playing here while we're all filling out the poll. So lots of things are changing, lots of things are happening. So I'm curious to see what folks are thinking about for security as we move into the next couple of months and through the end of the year. Great, we're getting some good participation. So keep on voting in that poll. Appreciate your responses. We'll give it a few more seconds here before we wrap that up. Okay, we've almost got about half the audience have participated. So there we go, just popped over. Thanks everybody for your responses. So let's take a look at the results of that. I'm interested to see where we came out. Interesting. So top response, 62% met or meet dynamic security requirements of DevOps environments. So security is an important issue. Kind of obvious, I hope, but certainly confirms that. Remove excess end user privileges on desktops and servers. Okay, I understand that with the dynamic and changing work environment we're going to talk about in a moment. Securely access and support any device anywhere. Again, very apropos for the environment that we're working in. Still strong responses on discover, manage, and audit and monitor privileged accounts. Of course, super important there. And give vendors secure remote access without using VPN. Most folks prefer not to use a VPN today. Certainly understand that. Okay, some great results, and I appreciate the engagement, the interest by everyone. We had really good participation in that. So let's move into our topic. It's not too hard to report the news because I think we get this on a daily basis, sometime an hourly by minute basis. Seems like there's something new being reported all the time. It's frankly hard to keep up. And it's never good news, right? The news is rarely good because bad news sells, good news rarely sells. But the economic impact from the coronavirus has certainly affected us all, whether you have a job now or you've been affected by that and you may have been furloughed or laid off. But the kind of results that we're hearing around, of course, the human crisis or tragic crisis of those that have lost lives and those that have been infected, maybe even someone's in your family, might have been one or both. And we won't be talking about that part of it today, but my heart goes out to folks that may have been affected by that in some way. Also, just the employment numbers that we're seeing today are certainly beyond anything I've seen in my lifetime. And we're talking about unemployment numbers, 14.7%, which is really closest to it is the Great Depression kind of times. And we've seen, of course, lockdowns and business closures, the importance of our healthcare workers, and all kinds of new social norms that we have had to start practice in addition to lockdown. Things like, of course, social distancing, the 6-foot difference, and just following along what those guidelines have been and what's acceptable to do, what's not, et cetera. And of course, it affects us depending on what region we're in. Highly densified cities, density cities, of course, been greatly affected initially in Washington and New York, but it's really kind of spread across all the country. So it's not anyone who's really escaped this, certainly in the US and frankly globally. So most of our news is consumed from a US vantage. So why do I bring all this? I'm not here to report more bad news. We've got plenty of that, but it certainly affects all of us, moving to shifting from working from home. If you're someone like myself that's already been doing that, that's not been a big change, but it's been a big change for a number of folks, and certainly the people that we support. At the same time, how we interact with our world has changed. Bottom left here, we're on an online meeting webinar kind of technology. Certainly, I've heard Zoom from people I never would expected to know what a Zoom meeting was. Whether it's from family and friends or church, synagogue, or whatever, folks everywhere are using it from everything, all the way to school. And businesses have had to react very quickly to this changing environment. I can recall very soon after the lockdown occurred, one of the things I was interested to see is when would businesses start changing their behaviors of their services and delivering it in different ways that could function in an environment where so many people were in a lockdown kind of condition. Actually wasn't too far from the lockdown that occurred, at least that my personal experience was. I was actually with Best Buy, and I noticed that I needed a new computer and couldn't order one. Well, actually I did order one, but it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed because of the priority shipments, appropriately so. So I started a research project to say, well, I built computers in the past, as a family kind of gaming computer function with my sons and I thought, well, maybe we could build one just to do some video editing and processing kind of work. And it actually turned out I could build enough of a computer that met the needs that I had with parts supplied from a couple of Best Buy stores. Well, can I get those things? And it turned out right about that time, they had shifted and made some changes to their web interface and their emails that they sent when people ordered, as well as when you arrived to go to a website and get a QR code that could be scanned and the product brought out to you. Pretty quick reaction. Of course, we've seen quick reaction also from the restaurant industry to try to survive, providing services for delivery or pickup. A new term that we probably didn't all use before was curbside pickup. And that's a very common thing that we're all talking about. Now, those are just a few examples. There have been some very strategic moves. Lockheed, for example, Rolls-Royce, for example, formed a consortium of companies, global companies, to start sharing anonymized and desensitized data. Why? Because we all have questions about what's the economy going to do, what's in the recovery look like, and of course we talk about terms like new normal, something else we haven't used before 2 or 3 months ago. And so Rolls-Royce actually formed a consortium of different kinds of company in the supply chain to share some of that data, because it's not likely we'll see a recovery that will happen all at once. We'll see very different recoveries in different countries, just like we've seen business opening, and it's opening for business in South Korea. In the US, the states have different policies and timing, all that kind of thing based on local conditions, and even politics and things like that, of course, play into this. We all would like to get back to the way things were, but I suspect they will never be exactly like they were today. Those are just a couple examples, but my point here is that we as technology professionals, we're in a climate now of great uncertainty, stating the obvious here, but that uncertainty is caused not just because of financial impact from COVID. It's changed because of social change and customer behavior change. And frankly, it may cause some permanent change in how we interact with society. And as we think about the products and goods and services that we deliver and how we deliver those things, that already is transforming. And again, maybe those things will be permanently changed. Maybe we won't have showrooms and restaurants with dining areas as prevalent as we've had in the past. Maybe we'll stay with much more contactless delivery types of services. So kind of the big disruption, right? The big, bad, scary disruption. Now, why is disruption important? Well, here is we all talk about digital disruption, digital transformation. In this case, this is such a large impact to all of us. Nobody really knows what's going to happen and how things are going to move forward. So we're all searching for and trying to understand, whether it's on a personal level or on a team, organization, business level, what the next new normal might look like. So with that, I have a little model that I talk about disruption, innovation, and acceleration, kind of this process that we go through. And disruption could be caused in lots of ways, and in this case, of course, COVID and the economic impact. But that can also be from a new competitor coming into the market. It can be a new product being introduced that provides some new innovation that makes it harder to compete with. Maybe you're the company that's bringing those things in. In our situation, we have some different kinds of threats that are occurring or disruptions that are occurring. One is just the workplace. Now, obviously, we've all moved to work at home kind of situations, or most of us have. And that's something that IT organizations have had to adjust to very quickly. I mean, it was a matter of a week or so, and all of a sudden we're all working from home. Now, some of us, again, have been doing that for a while. For others, it's a huge change. Unfortunately, we have a lot of systems in place where we can access them remote, but it also puts stress on things like our security policies and systems, the collaboration systems that we use, the communications that we use, as well as applications that are unique to our business that have to be accessed. Another thing that's unique about our current situation is that our buying and our personal behaviors, the behaviors of our customers are changing because of health safety concerns. That's not just not an economic impact. That's people asking, how do I re-enter the open for business economy when I'm not sure if things are safe for me to do that? And that's a personal individual decision. But certainly you think about groups of people who are at higher risk are going to be more cautious. Other folks, and there's been, of course, social reaction to the closures and people who are not wearing masks and going out and protesting and all kinds of things like that. So it's a great deal of uncertainty of what our businesses, what are our systems, what are our applications and our experiences with customers, how are those going to change? Contactless services, I talked about cyber security for a moment, but there's all kinds of new threats that we're seeing, and many of them related to coronavirus. I don't know about you, but I've received text messages of all kinds indicating things like, get this for your account for your new coupon, or here's information about the coronavirus, all kinds of things that attackers are using to leverage things like social engineering, phishing, et cetera. And of course, there are all kinds of attacks going against our systems as well. Something I think we don't talk about as much, and I'm just sharing this from prior experiences, and as you can tell from the almost full gray head of hair, I've been through a couple of transitions myself and lived through that both as a business leader, technology leader, and just an individual functioning in our society and economy. And there are things that happen in recoveries as things start to come back together. And one of them is rebuilding supply chains. And in this case, we're finding fragility in our supply chains, things like our food supply. And there have been announcements this week that the increase in prices that we're seeing in grocery stores are at record levels because things are under threat. The supply chain and the sources are under threat themselves. Things like food processing, plants for, pork and beef and chicken and things like that, let alone delivery. And, we all know the run on personal hygiene items, toilet paper, et cetera, and cleaning supplies. So there's been a lot of destruction and will be damage to supply chains that have been established. But that also creates some opportunities to change things on a going forward basis. Now, one of the things, and I'm no better than anyone else at predicting the future, the great thing about predictions, I decided a long time ago, is virtually no one is right. Maybe someone's intelligently right once in a while, but you're almost always wrong. So it's pretty safe. Go ahead and make a prediction. There's a lot of discussions about how our economy is going to recover. Well, in this case, it's simply not a recovery. It's also what happens in our world, in the world of coronavirus, and what happens with infection rates, outbreaks, et cetera, et cetera. So in our case, there's a lot of discussion about we may be going through some rolling cycles. Maybe it won't be as big as the impact that we just had or are just experiencing now with lockdowns. There's some discussions that could be bigger too. I don't want to be the purveyor of, doom and gloom, but that's of course a possibility. But it's pretty likely that we'll probably see rolling cycles of outbreaks, social measures being implemented, maybe as strongly or not as strong as what we've experienced so far, maybe more, even more so. Behavior shifts in people. It's one thing when we have health safety concerns and then that event is over and now we can function again. That's not going to be the case with COVID. That's going to be around with us for a while, several years. Some people say maybe forever. Who knows? Economic recessions are not going to happen all at once either. They certainly aren't globally. Different countries and economies are being affected differently on when they shut down, how they shut down, what kinds of services they allowed, how they're opening up, et cetera. So it's a complex environment of how all of this is functioning. And it's not easy for business leaders, technology leaders to make decisions about where do we make investments, how do we operate. There's a lot of strategizing, scenario development and getting a lot of data that frankly will help us make some of those decisions, and some of them will be good and some of them won't. So we've had some things already to tell us what some of those changes might be. Just in the last 24 hours, the California State University system announced that they will be moving to nearly all virtual college sessions for the fall, starting in the fall of 2020. There will be some on-site, but it'll only be things on campus that are required for, really can't be done without physical connection, in-person connection, but can be adjusted for with social distancing and other things to protect people. Folks like United have already announced that they've changed the AI algorithms for how they allocate seat assignments on planes. I don't know if I've seen that in action yet based on some of the news reports and kind of full airplanes, but they also have announced disinfectant processes, cleaning processes for every flight, after every flight. Because we talk about curbside pickup, there's also contactless, we mentioned before. Situations where we may just reduce or potentially eliminate in-person contact on a going forward basis. If some significant part of our population is not comfortable with in-person contact, just to pick an age group, maybe it's 60 or 65 and older as an age group, for example, that's still a sizable part of our population. So we may be in this world, we probably will be in this world of reduced or maybe no personal contact for delivery of goods and services. All kinds of discussions about sports teams and large venues, concerts, even school, of course, we mentioned earlier, and how that may come back together. We're just exploring options for how that may happen. I think one of the important things we'll also see, and starting already to see, is it's super important from the consumer side to understand what kind of protections you're putting in place, publishing sanitization procedures, which your social distancing practices are as a business, and how serious do you take that? So those are all, like 3 months ago, we wouldn't have talked about any of those things as important to how we develop goods and services, systems, applications, and infrastructure to support all of that. So what's the new normal? I don't think there's going to be a new normal. I think there's going to be a next normal, a series of normals, and something that we evolve to. mean, I think as humans, we're always looking for that somewhat steady state where we can feel like we understand our surroundings and the environment and the place we are in the world, and it's stable enough that we're comfortable. But we're going to have a series of changes of what we think is next normal. It's going to be normal, for example, for probably most of our education to be virtual. Maybe that will be normal for a long time or forever. Maybe we'll go back to on-site, on-campus delivery. We don't know, but that's things that we have to prepare for. Now, that's all the disruption and change that is happening. The great thing, and I don't, again, not talking about the human tragedy of this, but the great thing of disruption is it creates opportunity. It creates opportunity for businesses and people to innovate how we do things. Maybe we can't do things the way we used to. That's certainly the case with coronavirus, at least with the lockdown conditions and some things even going forward. But our customer experiences have an opportunity to change. Just to give you one example, something very quickly that happened with an experience that I had is with auto body repair. We had 2 cars that needed some repairs, good time to do it, we're not driving, et cetera. The entire experience of filing a claim with the insurance agency, as well as working with the auto body company to get the estimates and get it scheduled and get our automobiles in, were all 100% digital. Didn't have to have anyone come to our site. We didn't have to go to any location other than to drop off the car when it was all said and done to have the repairs done. So it was a complete contactless but all digital experience. And I suspect we'll see much, much more of that in how our services, how our goods and services are delivered. Thinking about the kinds of customers and how we segment them and think about how they interact. Now we have to think about things like what's the health concerns of a certain age population or population in the world who may have be at higher risk. We also may think about customers that we go after that we didn't serve priorly. There's actually one company that shifted their business model from a B2B to a B2C because the whole restaurant industry, their food services business, there's no customers for that. So they shifted it to a direct to customer model. Now they could do that because it's some flexibility in the technology that they use, but also, and as a smaller organization, they had some options to do that. We may be moving to a much fuller, maybe accelerating our move to a much fuller digital economy, digital payment systems that are contactless, business models that will change. And for us, investment in cost structure changes. Now, probably all been impacted some way in the investments in the IT systems that we work with and applications we're developing, all of those things, maybe significantly, but it isn't always for the negative. It can be for the positive. So that's my message is today we're in a situation as disruptive and uncertain as it is to create our future. So I'd encourage you to think about it that way. We have an opportunity to create the next future that is going to be present with us for probably the next decade and beyond. That's really the situation we're in. And now's the time to think about how we innovate and recreate that or rebuild. Let's look at it from a security perspective. We have a webinar here talking about security. Of course, there's many things that have been escalated as important because of the work at home population and the swift move to that. Identity management, endpoint security, certainly are two obvious things. Credentials management, we no longer have the social pressures in an office environment of not writing down your passwords on a yellow sticky in your office. You may be doing that now, or end users may be doing that. Or think about it in a larger scale of how you're managing credentials, passwords, tokens, certificates, and the access mechanisms or access privileges for that, whether it be for end users, systems, or how we build software. Super important. Multi-factor authentication on the rise as people, again, are accessing remote systems, getting into productivity tools. Organizations are starting to turn on and require multi-factor authentication. We've seen a huge shift in the phishing, malware, social engineering built around coronavirus and using that as a pathway to get in. There have also been significant nation state attacks attacking our healthcare industry, attacking universities doing research around coronaviruses, vaccines, treatments, et cetera, like that. So some shifts, some big changes that have occurred there as well. We of course have expanded our use of SaaS applications, maybe ramped up and scaled much more what we're using. We may have a smaller segment of our user population on something like Teams or Slack, and now all of a sudden everybody's using it. And of course, offsite access for systems that maybe used to require onsite. We of course have cloud applications, the cloud infrastructure, and the shift to DevOps or DevSecOps, and also the operations of security, SecOps, as part of the picture here. So I think the focus to think about around, and this list isn't in a priority list, but these are the things to think about as things are shifting. What do we need to re-examine, and what do we make sure we have in place? And are the assumptions or the requirements and beliefs that we had about that still true? Maybe they're shifting and we're not certain what the next normal looks like for that, but the same access controls we had before may not be as relevant, or maybe not be sufficient. So some organizations may be revisiting their entire security architecture and policies as this evolves, given where your maturity is along that process. So be thinking about these things as areas to address. Just a reminder, I just want to remind folks to be entering your questions into the questions tab on the GoToWebinar software. I'm going to be handing things over to Jason in just a moment. So think about moving forward as an opportunity to accelerate the digital transformation. We've invested in this. Organizations, some very significantly, have invested in digital transformation, not just changing into a digital form the interaction of how we do business or with our customers, but leveraging our ability to create software, create and deliver. The DevOps, doing Agile, doing DevSecOps to do security in the process. Much more flexible, programmable infrastructure. Of course, we have massive quantities of data, and there is some belief that organizations who are more effective at leveraging the data sources that they have, the data they're collecting about their business, their customers, their operations, their infrastructure, that may be a leg up that they have as they create strategies for recovering and accelerating through the recovery. Of course, even greater shift to web, mobile, more remote kinds of access to systems, and AI, machine learning, be an ever-increasing part of how do we operate, how can we be smarter. Maybe there's some things that also are automated in the process. So I guess my concluding message is we've invested a great deal in security. We've invested a great deal in how we create software using processes like Agile and DevOps, of course, the shift to the cloud. And those have all been for good reasons. Some may be cost savings at times, some may be enablement for digital transformation strategies. Now's the time we can deliver on that promise. Now's the time when the company its existence may be riding on our ability to create or react to or change and innovate in how we deliver software, networks, services, clouds, on-prem, off-prem, et cetera. So hopefully we can take what we've invested in, what we've learned, and also what we don't know, and find opportunities to either help the business innovate or maybe even come up with ideas to help the organization move through whatever economic recovery looks like for us, as well as that impact. If you're out of work, you're looking for a job, now's a great time to be building up your skills. It's oftentimes something that folks do during a downturn when they may be laid off. Invest in yourself. And it may be in these categories, it may be in other areas of your life as well, but that investment, I think, always pays off. So I'm going to turn things over now to my partner, Jason Jones, Senior Product Manager from Beyond Trust. And Jade, if you would take control of the screen and hand it over to Jason, love to hear his conversation. Here's the talk.
Great, thank you very much, Mitch. It's sometimes difficult to read the news and see some of the downsides of it, but it's also important to stay informed about everything. So thank you very much for contributing to that informative side of all of this. The just want to take a few extra minutes here to kind of talk through some of the discussions we've been having with our customers, some of the key areas in which we're helping them solve some problems throughout this big transition. I'm Jason Jones, one of the product managers here at Beyond Trust, coming to you from my wonderful home office slash bedroom slash daycare. So hopefully some of you guys can kind of empathize with that. But kind of looking at this broader thing that everybody's going through. It's not unique to DevOps or DevOps teams, but it's certainly affecting those teams in unique ways. And kind of to start off, the good news is we're kind of built for this, right? So there's processes that you have in place. We're really kind of designed around this idea of agility and adapting to new things and scaling up and down, and being very responsive to kind of changing things and changing environments. The bad news there is kind of the follow-up that we're also built for this, right? So we are expected to kind of respond and almost keep business as usual, even though everything around us is changing. So it's important to kind of understand both sides of that same coin. And then looking at what the broader business is doing, and this is really not even unique to our broader business, but just looking at the world, right? Cities and states, they're kind of going through what we're seeing as these phases, and everybody's kind of walking through them at different speeds, but essentially looking at reacting to the changing environment and then reassessing, what were we doing before? What do we need to be looking at doing now? And then prioritizing things so that we can still reach what might be our new goals. And this is, again, what everyone is walking through, but it's also important to bring this down to the team level, to our DevOps team level, and make sure that we're not just paying attention to what others are doing, but also walking through those same phases, problem solving and retooling to enable our business and enable our developers to continue doing their job. Reassess what our targets were previously. Don't just continue down the exact same path in this new environment. Make sure that we're reassessing the direction we're headed and what it is we're trying to achieve, and then prioritize what's necessary to make sure that we achieve those new goals that we've established. And as we walk through these phases, it's also important that we balance these concepts of agility versus security. So sometimes, as things are changing, first you might want to focus on agility, but it is critical not to just put security to the wayside during these times of change. And so these are some kind of key areas that we've been working with our customers on, while also understanding that they and we need to be agile so that we can make sure we're adapting to these changes, but also viewing everything through just as much scrutiny around the security aspect of it. So things like access. Are people, now that they're working from home, right, are they able to get to the same things, whether that be to the same systems, are they able to do their same tasks and jobs that they were doing previously, making sure that we're adapting to the new ways in which we might need to be doing business, but also not forgetting that you need to enable all of these people in a secure manner. And this is an important area where we want to make sure that we're not doing things that we wouldn't do otherwise. Maybe that's bringing a sledgehammer to solve this small problem, giving too much access just so someone can have some access. Also looking at things like, now's not the time to just be opening new ports or dropping firewalls just so somebody can get connected to something. We still need to make sure that we're enabling them to do their job while also applying the same security principles. It's a good time to be, as Mitch mentioned, it's a great time to be doubling down on those tools that you have, right? Lean on those systems that you've built over time. Just because everything around us is changing doesn't mean literally everything has to change. There's likely a lot of systems and things in place that you can rely on now as everything else is changing. But it is also a good opportunity to evaluate some new tools, just because the tools you have in place were working for what your goals were. Now that we've reassessed and we're reprioritizing, looking at what new tools can enable our business in new ways. But again, as just like with some of the DevOps fundamentals of shifting security to the left, making sure that we're making these decisions with security in mind so that it's not something that we have to readdress yet again down the line. And then lastly, not just looking at the tools and systems that we have, but let's focus on the teams. Ultimately, they're being largely affected here. Do they have the support they need? So developers are able to get help from the business and from the IT systems. And as things and connectivity is becoming more challenging, making sure that you're able to, as a business, to support those developers in their new environment. But also doing that, making sure that we're enabling that support and enabling those developers in a secure manner, because ultimately the business still has a reliance on the security of these tools and these systems that you're building. One of the kind of interesting things, there's this obvious like separation, you know, there's systems and tools, but there's and then users and people, right? There's this clear, distinct buckets of things that we kind of have to deal with as we evaluate change. What's interesting though, at least is that we've seen, is that, you know, our tooling and our processes are kind of designed to handle change. You know, we rely on them and they're consistent, but we can add to what they do. We can change some of the steps involved, and so they're kind of built to be resilient in times of change and be adaptive. But kind of what we're seeing is that, ironically, they're the things that are kind of staying the same. A lot of the systems that were in place can still be leveraged today. A lot of the automated processes are still moving right along just like they were before, especially when you're kind of rallying around centralized systems. Mitch mentioned things like, you know, Teams and Slack and things like that, but also when we look at you know, more security-minded things like secrets management, having that be a centralized tool within your environment, allowing you essentially to let everybody go home without the keys to the kingdom going home with them. And this doesn't necessarily mean centralized to the office or centralized to a data center. Certainly you could be rallying around SaaS solutions or cloud providers. But this is just kind of an interesting thing about these tools and systems kind of largely staying in place and intact. And so it's really a good opportunity to just kind of let those systems be. They don't have to change just because some other components and aspects are changing. But the real affected component here is the users, right? This is where our teams are starting to work from home. They are not necessarily able to do their job in the exact way that they were able to before. Kind of in this DevOps ecosystem and within these teams, there's kind of this perception of, I have internet connections, so I can essentially do my job. But once we get past that kind of reactive state, we need to dig a little bit deeper into what's needed now that developers are working from home, or that everyone across the business is working from home. What are the ways in which they're getting to these centralized systems that we've kind of decided are working fine, but they still need to be, you know, utilized and connected to? And are we able to enable our developers in that way? Also, you know, looking at not just accessing some of these automated systems and workflows, but what does it look like for devs now to connect to production? Like if they need to troubleshoot something. Previously, they were doing that maybe from one location. Now they're doing it from another. If I can tell you that if we're adding a bunch of people's home IP addresses to firewall rules, that's likely not the right solution and something that we can reevaluate. So just kind of recapping here, some final thoughts on, certainly everything's changing, but where we're really seeing success is where people are finding that right balance between agility and security. Standardizing on the right tools and processes, leaning on them when they're already in place and working fine. Putting your security lens on as you evaluate what might change and evaluate those changes themselves, and then certainly paying attention to the teams and not just the automated tools and the systems that are running in your environment. They're certainly a critical component to keeping those things up and running, and it's important to make sure that we support them and do that also in a very secure way. So allow us to maintain our, you know, as best we can, business as usual, adapt to the changes so that we can have that optimistic posture as we kind of look into the future. So these are the kind of conversations that we have with customers all the time. BeyondTrust is a privileged access management company, so we have solutions that allow you to manage the privilege in all of its different forms across your organization, whether that be the accounts to your critical infrastructure, or the admin rights, for example, on your user systems, or actually securing the actual connectivity to systems, whether that be getting vendors on, or now that everybody's working from home, making sure that they're connecting in a secure way. So that's what I've got. I really appreciate the time today. And Mitch, thanks again for all the informative stuff and being a contributor there.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. Great. Appreciate your thoughts, and from the security perspective too, Jason. Why don't we turn to some Q&A? Before I do, let me pop up another poll. And the poll that we're going to ask is just to collect some feedback question is, are you interested in hearing scheduling a personalized demo with Beyond Trust? So that's not what we'll talk about in Q&A, but we'll keep that up for a little bit here during our Q&A session. First question that we have coming in is from Kayo, so if I say your name correctly. It's kind of a long question statement. Essentially, Kayo's asking, while it agrees this huge opportunity, organizations tend to kind of freeze and not do much or not invest and really just focus on keeping things normalized, keeping systems up. It's also hard to contract with companies to do new things because of the disruption, things that may be happening with them as well. So I'll jump on this, and Jason, then maybe you can share some thoughts as well. And Kaio, I totally agree. When you're experiencing an economic downturn and then you pile on top of it all the health impact and the kind of social changes in how we do business, how we deliver services, it creates such disruption. It can oftentimes cause an organization not to do anything, just to focus on keeping things up, running, and stable. Maybe the company, and I don't know this is your situation, but it may be true that the company has to do that, may not have access to sources of liquidity, cash flow to keep things going, not sure what their costs are going to be, debating about keeping people on staff, or maybe being forced to do layoffs or furloughs. A lot of financial things happening that make it really difficult for companies to make decisions. Here's what I would suggest, and I don't know your particular role in the organization. There are multiple ways of doing strategy work, and one of the ways is scenario development. And you can even do this on your team, on your project, on your organization, in IT, et cetera, because it also may inform other parts of the business of what some possibilities are, what you could do to help advance things. And this is work that doesn't have to cost you money from outside folks. You can get help, but you could do much of this yourself. And that process is essentially thinking, brainstorming, what are potential futures? What does our world look like from this business standpoint, from this team and organization standpoint, of what we may be operating in, let's say, a 12 to 18, 24-month time frame. You could kind of pick one or a couple of time horizons. You don't have to think too far in the future. If you just think about maybe up to the end of the year to next summer, what are we, knowing what we know now, what are potential futures like? What if we stayed in a large lockdown situation and had to work in that environment for quite a while? And then there's other scenarios that you could develop. Now, what would that create in terms of requirements, needs, changes, processes for us? And how well are we equipped to do those things? And are things what we might do or want to invest in those areas? So that can help you kind of start to get a sense or gain some sense of control back over what you think may happen. It also might equip you or the others in the organization to help make some decisions of where to invest. Now, there's some really great examples of, and not every company is in a position to do this, but there's some really great examples of companies that have invested. I'm going back a ways here to 9/11. Apple at that point in time, between 2001 and 2002, increased their percentage of revenue invested into R&D, almost doubling it. I think it was around 60% that they did an increase. Of course, that was right in the middle of, we didn't know if we could travel, if we were being attacked, all that kind of thing, and huge economic disruption then as well. They doubled down on their investment in research, and part of that was, of course, understanding their customers, but also innovating on products. The net of it was some of that increased investment helped bring out the iPod, leading to, of course, the iPhone and iPad and other things down the road. Another innovation that came out of it as well from that advanced investment was iTunes, which is all of those are central things to, of course, Apple's strategy today. Back then, that was an entirely huge disruptive shift in their product strategy. So it's easy to pick on Apple because they have lots of cash to do that, but I imagine those bets were just as challenging to make as well. So to kind of get, hopefully that gives you some ideas of how you can work an environment where maybe it is just about keeping things running. How can we help? Think about it, how we advance things. From your perspective, Jason, anything you would want to add to that kind of a question?
Yeah, just there's no silver bullet here. Excuse me. Everyone's kind of dealing with the same struggle. So I don't know that there's an answer per se, but just kind of an optimistic perspective on it. When you're looking at how businesses are handling their contracts and ultimately their money, they've got kind of these three options: to spend it, save it, or to invest it. And certainly we're seeing the same thing, that there's this save mode going on. We see that all across the country. But what that leads to typically is an investment phase. And so, the right processes, the right tooling, building applications, those are all in kind of an investment phase. And so we're expecting to kind of see that come pretty quickly after we kind of get over this hump of the save phase, or kind of this reactionary phase. So kind of looking forward to seeing that transition being made as well.
Very good, very good. Well, let's kind of shift things from a very different perspective, and this question would go to you, Jason. It comes from Catherine in our audience. How do you handle a situation where someone with privileged access gets sick from the virus? They need to step out of their role, and you need to quickly adapt to that change, either hiring someone or having someone else step in. How do you deal with that? Any suggestions for how to handle that immediate, right in front of you kind of disruption?
Yeah, so this is one of those areas where it kind of depends on what your processes were previously. Kind of like a well-structured privilege management process and flow really starts at kind of that joiner, mover, lever aspect of users coming into an environment, changing roles within the environment. And this is just another example of, one, you've got somebody potentially leaving a role and somebody who might be stepping into that role. And so having this like broader role-based access controls around things, and having the right processes that stem from who is working for my company, who's working with particular systems, and privilege what that role is, and not necessarily that person or a particular time period. So just kind of structuring it around that concept of what are all of the systems and the types of privileges that are necessarily to accomplish this job or role, and then swapping people in and out of that role as needed should be a pretty easy kind of transition.
Great, great. And, I would just add to that. Hopefully, this isn't the situation where you're realizing you need something to manage credentials and privileges and secrets. You've got something in place to work with, and it's reasonably functional. But if you don't, no better time than the present to get started. There's the adage of the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best is today. So get started on that. And if you find weaknesses in how you're doing this, how you've implemented the procedures, et cetera, great time to work on that. If you've already got technology in place, et cetera. So encourage you to do that. We definitely had some great questions here. Another question that I wanted to ask you about, Jason, is are you hearing anything? What are you hearing? Are you hearing anything from your customers about challenges that they're being asked of the business? The business is being asked to shift in some way, and they're wanting to know what kind of changes that might be to them about how they think about security, credentials management, access control.
Yeah, certainly. So I think, as we've kind of discussed at length today, the biggest one that we are getting questions about and tasked with is kind of managing privilege and securing, making sure we have the right controls in place now that everybody suddenly has a distributed workforce. Certainly some businesses were already in somewhat of that form. Some people already work from home, or you have multiple offices. But now that everybody's doing it, this is now a primary concern for all organizations. And so just, in alignment with everything that's going on, that's absolutely the primary security concern that we're getting asked to solve for our customers.
Well, and I imagine you're probably thinking about this too. Is this a temporary or is this a permanent change? Will we have folks working from home at such large levels? Will that have the same kind of demands on our security? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And a lot of what we're seeing is long-term decisions being made. So the ways in which you secure a distributed workforce are in a lot of ways a better way to do security. It's a great opportunity to reassess the way things we're doing, just not just reassessing our new goals, but reassessing how we were even planning on achieving those goals, especially from a security perspective. And so I don't know that we're seeing any change to how security is done that might change back once people start going home. So in a lot of cases, we're now less comfortable with the environments that they're working from. We're less comfortable with maybe even the machines that they're running our applications on, and so we're tightening up security. And I don't see that that's going to be those changes to be temporary once everything gets back to quote unquote normal.
It's interesting. Accelerated Strategies has done some research around the COVID-19 virus and the effects that that's had on our systems and security and things like that. In a recent survey that we did, I think we had over 1,000 respondents to this. Is what was people's desire about working from home once those restrictions were lifted, either from local state governments or from work from a business standpoint, and said we can return to work now. It was interesting. The response was overwhelming that individuals felt that they preferred working from home 3 days or more per week. It was 70% of people said that. Now, about a quarter of those folks already were working at home. Another quarter of those folks were wanted to work 3 or more, or wanted to work full time at home. So half was actually 51%. Half the people preferred working from home like they are now. And then the remainder, the 19%, were folks that were working, with 3 days or less, or 3 days or more. And then kind of everybody else fell in the middle. It's only like 14% of people that wanted to go back and work just like they were working before. Now that's been a couple of weeks ago, about a month ago. So there may have been more fear and concerns about returning to the work environment. I could imagine that data responses might shift over time. And to add to that, the number one reason why people preferred working from home was the no commute. They got time back in their day. For some people, it's more than an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending on your commute. When you factor in both ways, it could be 2 or 3 hours. I mean, significant chunks of time being handed back to people to either do work or spend with family or doing other kinds of things. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense. Of we potentially could have a large workforce that is focused on working from home for some time, maybe for a long time.
Yeah, I think it's also it'll be important to kind of keep doing those same polls because there was certainly a bit of a honeymoon phase to the whole, shelter in place and quarantine aspects of this,
Mhm.
where at first it was this kind of fun change where you had to figure out how to do work from home and kind of where's my quiet place that I can take a call, things like that. But maybe in a month from now, that honeymoon phase is going to wear off, and it'll be interesting to see how those statistics change.
Yeah, we shift from honeymoon phase to cabin fever phase. you know,
That's
I'm
right.
being too locked up at home. I would expect we'll have some shifting, and that again is kind of to the point of both of our talks, is that shifting, changing requirement and environment where we're in and where we're moving to over time. Another question we have is about cloud security and credentials management in a DevOps environment. And I know that you recently, I guess, end of last year, beginning this year, released a DevOps related kind of product. Can you speak to credentials, secrets management in that kind of environment where you're working with the cloud either partially or fully?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an area where kind of having that centralized, in this case specifically secrets management, but a centralized tool, something that's kind of rallied around the cloud, is paying huge dividends if that's kind of already the structure that you had in place. Part of our approach is to not necessarily be tied to a specific cloud environment or be on-prem or in the cloud. It's really to have systems that can run in all of those different environments so that organizations can kind of adopt and adapt as necessary as kind of they transition from on-prem to the cloud. And then also important to make sure it matches with the other tooling that you're using. It's an area where It needs to work in the same environment that the rest of your tools are running in. So yeah, certainly an area that we are seeing increased interest in, as not necessarily unique to SaaS or running things in the cloud, but certainly that's a big part of that story. And it's another just one of those areas where those are the types of systems that we're really seeing largely unaffected by a lot of this change. Maybe as security ramps up, or you're having more considerations and questions around evaluating those tools, implementing security alongside that transition is a great opportunity to kind of shift security left and do things right from the get-go. So yeah, it's definitely something we have lots of conversations with customers about, but one of those areas that really hasn't changed a whole lot over the last couple of months.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, we all anticipate, if we're not already, we'd increase our use of cloud and other SaaS and software infrastructure type services. Another question that we have is, we found that when we moved to working from home, working remotely, that some of our administrators had much broader privileges than they needed. We're in the process of reevaluating access controls, maybe, and narrowing some of those permissions. Are we the only ones that experience this, or is this a common phenomena? Good
No,
question for you.
yeah, no, that's absolutely common. It's kind of also aligned with that concept of, like, as people are going home, you got to be careful about what they're taking home with them. And admin rights is just one example where that looks and has different implications now that they're connecting from different locations, or running, having those administrative privileges, or maybe it's having those critical account passwords to your production infrastructure, taking those things outside of the digital castle walls becomes a big security concern, and gets evaluated with kind of a different level of scrutiny for sure. It's definitely a topic that we're seeing increased activity around.
Well, and I would add to that, Jason, you kind of implied this too, is in addition to people be thinking about systems and where privileges may be embedded in software that's getting checked into source control management systems or scripts, or other locations where the things that you need to be managing under a secrets password management system needs better control. Oftentimes changes like this expose those kinds of problems as well. Agree?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, good. Well, I think we've gotten to all of our questions. Let me just double check again. Great questions from our audience. So I think we'll wrap things up at this point. Maybe we'll give a couple minutes, a minute or two back to everyone. We're almost at the top of the hour. So join me in thanking my co-host, presenter today, Jason Jones, who's Senior Product Manager from Beyond Trust. Jason, great job. It's been a pleasure doing this with you.
Yeah, thank you as well. Appreciate it.
You bet. And we'd like to thank you, our audience, of course, for your participation. Just a reminder, we're sending an email to everyone with a recording of the webinar, as well as the link to the slides to download those. And be sure and check out devops.com for additional interesting, exciting webinars, and Beyond Trust to find out more about their products that they offer. Again, thank you for joining us. I know your time is valuable. It's just as valuable when you're working from home as when you were in the office, and we appreciate and value that you spent it with us. So it's been my pleasure hosting and talking with you on the webinar today. So be careful, be safe, and be well.